on this for
yeah.
our bird SAGs, although we are going to dive into the Franklin County Airport situation, and I'll get help from Roz on some of the nuances of where we are now with that. Basically, the bird SAG met twice, April and then again in October. Our membership has pretty much stayed the same, with Jim Armbruster joining us on the SAG. We have had the presence of Roz at the meetings as well, even though she's no longer on the SAG, and John Gobel from the state. No species were listed in 2023, and we didn't propose any species for downlisting in 2023. Franklin County Airport was, and we can do Franklin County at the end of this, or we can dive right in here. How do you want to approach this?
I'll wait till John's back.
Okay.
Just in case he.
This was a situation where this wasn't pleasant. We met with staff from VTrans at our April meeting. They were confused about what was happening at Franklin County Airport. There was work that had already been done at Franklin County Airport, which had not been, they had not applied.
Thank you, Matt.
They hadn't applied for the permit in order to begin their work. At least on that call, there seemed to be confusion between folks at VTrans. And so that kind of launched us on a process, which again, Roz can fill you in a little bit more on. The SAG birds did, with much discussion and some reluctancy, recommend the permit application to the endangered species, which I think then moved forward and accepted that recommendation. But during that process, during the process over the course of the summer and the fall, there's been plans, mitigation plans, development plans, revegetation plans. Some have come in on time, some haven't come in on time. There's been situations where the process that VTrans has done in order to comply with the permit have not been followed. All basically to try to see what we can do at Franklin County Airport to maintain that habitat, the largest breeding habitat for grasshopper sparrows in the state, and also hosts eastern meadowlark. The regular surveys, which we've conducted annually, which interestingly enough, when VTrans came in and said, do you have any data to support this? We had a box of 20 years of airport surveys that had been started by Ted Allen way back in the 1990s, I guess. So we were able to demonstrate the presence of grasshopper sparrows on the property and push and support the need for this permit and the requirements that VTrans were to required in order to not only do their, their management, but to provide mitigation areas and all sorts of stuff for grasshopper sparrow. At that point in time, the SAG kind of stepped out of it. The state began working with VTrans on all of these different pieces. Roz kept us updated. And out of our fall meeting, the SAG did put together a motion, which was forwarded and seconded, which is SAG birds believe the conditions for the plans required by the permit for grasshopper sparrow habitat must be accomplished, and VTrans must be held accountable for past, present, and future work. So we can go more into this, and you can give us a quick update here, and then I'll go into the other species reviews. Or
sure, I can give a little more of an overview of what's happened lately since our SAG meeting in October. We worked with VTrans to get areas that had already been disturbed to get them seeded. And then we started working on the restoration and management plan. There were 4 plans required in the permit. Mark laid out 3 of them, and the last one was a development plan that came from V-Trans, so we could see what they were thinking of for their future at that airport, so that we weren't always in a reactionary position to see what they had in mind or what they had planned. So we started on the restoration management plan. They have a consultant that they had work with us, but it became clear that we really needed to figure out the mitigation plan so that we knew where we were doing restoration and management and how we were going to do it. So all the focus shifted to that. And in November and December, we actually had some really productive meetings with V-Trans to look at the realm of possibilities, which there are very few. And I can explain that some more too, and to start honing in on, what would work given what their plans had been and what we're trying to do. And there's sort of 2 pieces. One is we require 2-to-1 mitigation for grassland bird habitat, and there's not a lot of land to work with there that's actually suitable for the sparrow. And options we discussed included offsite options, offsite mitigation, and those require a level of risk in that we don't know if the species, we couldn't create the habitat, we don't know if they will come, and if they do come, it might not be for 10 years. So, the preference really was to try to do as much on site as we could because that's the highest chance of success. But that being said, there's limited acreage to work with. There just aren't more fields and open areas there. And so we've even taken a look at a quarry that's like nearby, like it's just hop, skip, and jump over the woods from there. Like maybe they can buy that and level that out and plant that. And then we've talked all about all kinds of possibilities, going all the way back to what we talked about at the SAG meeting. Some areas that they were going to clear anyway, and then making that would be adjacent to existing habitat. And so basically, broadening the habitat that exists there now. They've also, they've purchased the southern grasslands that we are interested in trying to get as mitigation. And so we're talking with them about using that as well for mitigation, which would be really huge and helpful. And it's all, it's been productive compared to, I would say, initially, and it's all in process still. So it's, once I have something that everyone has agreed to, then I want to bring it to the SAG and the ESC to look at and pour over. There's other small pieces to it that we're asking for to ensure that there's actually high quality habitat there in the end. And once we figure out the mitigation piece, then we'll move on to the management restoration piece, which would, be asking for, invasives management, because I think that'll be a thing. And very, all the management practices that'll support the birds' habitat, and also asking in the mitigation plan that there will be, permanent protection so that we don't have to go back and be here again in 5 years on the areas that we're interested in having that in. So that's the gist of it. John's been really helpful in those discussions. So having him involved is really great.
And for those, just to refresh everyone's memory, the grasshopper sparrows like droughty soils and patchy, spacey grass kind of things. So hayfields in general are just not necessarily, we can't switch out a hayfield for Franklin.
We also can't, necessarily look at, Dead Creek and say, oh, we can create grasshopper sparrow habitat here because those aren't the right soils and they'll show up. So,
it's different like a
It's tempting,
bobolink or a
but-
meadowlark where you
Yeah.
can change some cutting schedules
Right.
and, you know, any hayfield.
Or
might
throw
be.
down the right seed, even like even reseeding, you know.
So the SAG wants to acknowledge the hard work that the state has put into this whole process. You know, when we first encountered it last April and all of a sudden you're like, oh, they've already violated the permit system right from the start and didn't apply for the permit, went ahead and did work anything, you start thinking of, well, you know, we got to figure this out because that just sets precedent for others doing the same thing. If we can't convince, you know, the state as a whole to, you know, work with each other on this project. So it's great to hear that things are moving forward. We're going to continue that process. Roz did do surveys, different surveys from what we usually conducted, which are point count surveys, which we've been done for 20 years now at Franklin. But did some area search surveys and did come up with 13 singing males.
Yeah,
Was it
18.
18,
Yeah.
yes, 18 singing males.
And that's because I couldn't do the point counts because of the construction
Right.
underway. So and I also wanted to get as complete a count as I could, just because of what was going on, so.
So that
full
was,
area search.
that was positive, you know, some of those birds may have been displaced from the construction, as Roz mentioned, I think, in her thing, but, you know, it's good to know that those birds, at least that many birds are there. That's probably one of the highest counts that we've had. And that didn't
Well,
even
because it's
include,
not point count.
yeah, and
Yeah.
that's, it did not include the Handy property to the south, right?
Correct,
So potentially more birds there, so
probably not,
probably,
Yeah.
okay. So,
not yet.
anyway, you know, from the bird perspective, great to hear 18, the number 18, because the other large site that supports them, and I'm kind of skipping around here, is
Can I maybe just
Yeah.
a quick question then? And I might just not have followed where your break was, Roz, but you were, you know, sort of, you were saying productive meetings with V-Trans in November, and then you said there were two pieces to this. And you talked about mitigation and you went through all the options.
And the
Was that-
restoration and management, I think was the other
Okay,
thing I was
all right,
talking about.
okay.
I think.
Well, I mean, I don't think you actually got into the details there. I mean, maybe
Mhm.
that's the question. Do we have a restoration and management plan at this point?
No, we had, they sent a draft, back before it was due, which was it was initially due October 1st.
Mhm,
And we sent back feedback to get
Yeah.
it closer to what we needed,
mhm.
and that's where it stands. And then we started going into mitigation.
I mean, Jesus, what the hell? This is, oh God, this bullshit.
I'm
Yeah,
fine with that though, because.
strike that from the record. Ken, be quiet.
I'm fine with that though, because as it turns out, I really want
Yeah,
the mitigation to be nailed down.
yeah,
because that's
yeah,
gonna
yeah.
direct
I
what's-
hear you.
So
I hear you. Yeah,
it's fine. But also, I mean, I've been saying to John, you know, we need to keep this process rolling because I'd like to see them doing some stuff beginning, you know, early in, you know, spring season, as soon as we
Yeah,
can.
yeah,
And we
right.
need to get all that.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and this whole conversation did enter the public sphere on the Vermont Bird Listserv. There was quite a few discussions, calls for action and so on and so forth. So it is kind of played out in that. But again, from my perspective, you know, folks from Fish and Wildlife are doing the best they can in a pretty cruddy situation to really have an impact on the long-term health of this population up at Franklin County Airport. So I applaud them in, you know, kind of having to wrestle with that.
Oh, and the two pieces question, I just
Oh.
remembered, and I'm glad you said that, because
Yeah.
I did forget something, which is I'm also taking into account the timing of everything, like the grasshopper sparrows will have less habitat available to them even while we're restoring, because you don't get instant
Right.
restoration.
Mhm.
And so I'm also trying to convey the importance of time.
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead, John.
First of all, your frustrations are shared, as you might imagine.
Yeah,
appreciate your kind words about Roz and Noel's efforts to carry this forward. And just want to acknowledge that. I mean, this has been an unusually difficult, frustrating set of circumstances. And we don't need to dig into that right now. Although happy to talk with anybody about it another time. But just to say, Roz and Noel have done an amazing job of not wavering from what we all know is necessary and essential to maintain this species on that site. And there have been lots of twists and turns that could have easily derailed things. And fortunately, thanks to their perseverance and tenacity, I think, as Roz mentioned a moment ago, seemed to cross a threshold in our conversations with V-Trans a month and a half, 2 months ago. Because, well, the dynamic was changed at the level that it needed.
Mm-hmm.
That was very helpful. It's unfortunate that it took that long, but I do feel optimistic that Roz and Noel, will achieve the necessary outcomes that are in the permit. I think there's been a lot of sleepless nights.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
There. And maybe there too.
Worth, just, I know this issue took, was discussed on, whatever the eBird discussion like this. We received less than 20 public comments, which surprised me. I can't say whether that's good or bad or just in line with what John was saying before about needing more staffing.
No, I think
More
that's,
public comments are always helpful.
I don't, I think it went out to the bird community, and that there were a core group of individuals that kind of floated things up. I think there is even a lawsuit that somebody was going to bring and all sorts of stuff. But I don't think it was a broad swath of the birding community in Vermont. I just wanted to say that some people were aware of that, and there have been, comments by Audubon Vermont and a number of NGOs to try to support moving this work forward and recognizing, both the missteps that V-Trans did in not getting that first permit, waiting so long. They're just, when we sat down at that April meeting at the SAG, we were like, oh, and then all of a sudden V-Trans are kind of arguing back and forth amongst themselves about whether the tower could actually be used. And it was like, oh, and we need this by May 1. So, yeah, a special shout out to Noel and to Roz for handling this difficult situation.
But I'll just make a comment with the bird listserv that POW is on the bird listserv, as are other groups, and there have been connections made between what happened, sort of like the failure at Franklin County Airport, and the reorganization of the Fish and Wildlife Board. And so, just kind of thinking about this as the whole thing, sort of being holistic in terms of how, certain parts of the public interpret the way these events unfold. So,
and and even this bill, I don't know how much Franklin County Airport, the bill, what is it, 812, how much of Franklin County Airport played into the creation of that as well. So,
And the difficult piece about that is that POW doesn't concern themselves with grasshopper sparrows.
oh yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
But it
So-
speaks to a bigger issue. Al.
right,
Yeah.
exactly.
It
Yeah,
is, as much about mischaracterization of how this state's government works.
Yeah.
And our level of integrity in the jobs that we do, which is really unfortunate.
yeah, yeah.
Because, reality is most of the work that we do goes well. It's important. We don't do anything in isolation. We work with partners all the time. So that's something that gets missed in the distortion of public perception around fish and wildlife conservation these days, or natural resource conservation generally, is that, there's certain elements that are part of this conservation work and they aren't doing their job, or they don't have integrity, or they even have bad motives.
Yeah.
None of which is true, as you all know, because we all work together. It happens, conservation in the state happens and happens really well because we all work together. That's part of what gets missed. I also worry about, look, as long as we've been dealing with the tension between various types of development and wildlife conservation, there's always these one-offs, and they're problematic, and sometimes they're really unfortunate, but you can't escape that. There's no system that is the panacea for how you're going to effectively protect everything against development that's either well planned and goes through the regulatory process, or actually sort of comes off the rails, and you gotta deal with the chaos of that. And so I hope that the majority of people don't start to mischaracterize the value of how we do conservation work as a partnership, just the department as a partnership, because of these one-offs. For some interests to try and mischaracterize in a difficult situation like this, it's still going in the right direction. Nobody's given up, and we're going to get there. It's frustrating, but we've been through these things before. We come out the other end and we're generally successful. Bigger risk right now is that people use situations like that to mischaracterize the global nature of conservation, especially conservation work in the state. Not only is unfair and disrespectful to the hardworking public servants to make it happen every day, but it actually works against our conservation interests, because it takes everybody's attention off the bigger issues, bigger opportunities. That is one of our, I would argue, our collective greater challenge, making sure that this perception doesn't prevent us from doing the conservation work that needs to be done.
Well, Brian, why don't you go real quick? I think we got to keep moving. I'm already badly
just real quick.
mismanaging this meeting.
Okay, I'm trying not to get quick question. I'm glad to hear about the progress. I recognize how hard this has been. Nevertheless, I'm still wondering if the accountability piece will be addressed. I mean, I think there needs to be accountability, and I don't know whether the committee wants to go on record at some point about some sort of penalty to AOT for this, despite the progress that we may be seeing.
Are you talking about the violation?
Yeah,
Yeah.
fine. I mean, is that something we want to discuss? Or I'll just put it out there. I mean, I really think there does indeed need to be accountability.
Yeah, and that's outside of the realm that we work in our division. That really goes to enforcement.
Brian, shoot me an email and say topic for the April meeting.
Okay.
And again, thanks again, Roz, because I know that I've been part of the process, and I know you've taken the brunt on this. So, and it's nice to see that the Fish and Wildlife Department is strong in their stance and are moving more forward to solve problems. I think that's all we can really do at this point. All right, I'll be quick because I know I'm behind. So we did welcome Jill Kilborn as the new wildlife diversity manager. I don't know, was she on at the fall meeting? I can't.
Bird biologist.
Bird biologist, okay. And so that's been great. We've been working with her, and we had some discussions about the conservation design program too, but that kind of got overshadowed by Franklin County. Right now, we're in the process after talking to Jill. Hopefully the eastern meadowlark and the whippoorwill recovery plans that are being done by the Vermont Center of Eco Studies will be ready for the SAG to review within the next month or so, and we will do that, make our recommendations, changes, things like that. And I think on Jill's timeline, she really wanted to maybe get that to the those to the endangered species by their April meeting. We'll see how quickly that goes and how much revision needs to be done on each of those plans. We have been updated pretty regularly on the meadowlark plan from Kevin. And we'll have to see about the WIP plan. As far as species management, you know, things went relatively well across most of the birds on the list. Osprey are doing really well. Loons had a successful breeding season. Peregrines also had a successful breeding season, as well as bald eagles. There has been a little bit drop in some of the reproductive success for peregrines and falcons, but you know, we're still talking, you know, for falcons, eagles, you know, 23 pairs of the sites, the 36 sites that were monitored, not all sites were monitored, produced 42 fledglings, and 4 new nest sites were located in 2023. Again, you know, we got 52 young peregrine falcons off this year from the nesting thing. So these species are recovered, are doing well, and seemingly holding their own. As far as other ENT species, common terns had a slight dip this year. We had peregrine falcon show up at the nesting colony 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, and really take our numbers down, our adult numbers. Stuck around for a while. So this is the first time in quite a few years that our 5-year average has dropped below the 200 needed for downlisting, but our 10-year average is still above that. So, and this year we were in the odd position. We were able to catch and band, I think, 119 fledglings, which gave us a productivity number, which was 0.7, which was higher than what we need to downlist. And I think there were probably more than 200 chicks on that island that we just could not. I mean, you have 4 people out there and you're walking along and I'm the bander and you've got chicks running between your legs. You've got chicks all over once they're mobile. And these are, you know, 7 to 10-year-old day chicks. So, you know, they're fully functional. Even at 2 days, they're functional. So I don't think we caught all the chicks or banded all the chicks. Our window was compressed. We did what we could. So I think those numbers are even better. We did have 2 Caspian terns nest on the island and hatch chicks. Keep going. And anyway, we saw the chicks. Each nest has 2 chicks. And then when we went out there and we came back, they were gone the following week. So common tern chicks, cryptic colored, they hatch, they run away. Caspian tern chicks, I found out, are bright white and sit there right in the nest. So who knows who the predator was that had them. But we had upwards of 15 Caspian terns on the island during the summer. I'll quick go through. So upland sandpipers, common nighthawk, sedge wren, Henslow sparrow, loggerhead shrike, all birds that we have no documented nesting in the state. Black terns, we had an increased survey effort this year, and we came up with 41 pairs with lots of folks from different organizations volunteering. That's still kind of below the numbers that we have seen in the past. So we're going to try to replicate that again. We talked about grasshopper sparrows. We had 7 documented at Camp Johnson, so they're hanging in there. Whippoorwill, BCE conducted a lot of surveys. Fairhaven area is still where they're finding most of the birds, but the surveys were impacted by the flooding this year. You can see from my report that if you want more detailed information on some of these species, You can look to those people listed. And then myself and Alan Strong were elected to be chair and vice chair, Margaret Bell secretary. How's that?
Thank you, Mark.
I
Appreciate it.
sped right
Yeah,
through it there.
good. All right. Great. Who's up? Is it Matt? Matt, you're up. Okay.
Try to keep this quick. I'll just give you species by species updates for all of our threatened and endangered.
Nice.
Take long. And Carla, please feel free to chime in if you want to add anything to this. Grace put together the report for the most part for us. We greatly appreciate it. The Flora Advisory Group, or SAG Flora, continues to have high attendance and membership participation, and 15 members at least at each of our 3 meetings over the course of the year. So we're getting great input from our members. We added 1 new member earlier this year, Ryan Bogo. Great to have their organization directly represented. And of course, the big shakeup in the mechanical. I'm Steve on the spot pop, and Grace coming in to fill those shoes. And she's doing a great job from our perspective. And Bob fortunately has maintained his involvement with Flora SAG, so we're having some continuity there. Taking our notes.
Wow.
Amazing. See how long we can keep them in that role. But in addition to our 3 sort of sit-down meetings, we had our typical summer field trip as well, which I wasn't able to participate in, but focused on looking at impacts from the July flooding at that particular ledges. Sharon. Let's see this. I guess we've recently formed a subcommittee to do sort of a routine process of re-ranking a bunch of our species, and then that feeding directly into the Wildlife Action Plan updates for our SGCN list. So we actually just met yesterday to start that process. So that ball is rolling, hopefully to meet our deadlines for John. In the listings department, we had 1 proposed delisting that's been considered and approved by this body, the marsh horsetail, I believe in Flustry. Always nice to be able to delist a species that seems to be doing well. And I think I found yet another population later this summer since we've considered that. So unfortunately, we do continue to have unpermitted takings for listed species. I actually am not up on all the details. OG's Grace has been handling them. The details we have are in the report. Takings of marsh sunflower in Colchester, the rec center project. Maybe you were involved too, Roz. You know more than I do about what all this transpired there. And the Bridgman Quarry, which was sort of a difficult permit, that a site where they actually had a takings permit for a bush clover, and then actually a situation where SAG originally was against issuing the permit. They moved forward, but they ended up having takings and unpermitted takings outside their permit in the process of starting that quarry operation. So that's in the process of being handled. I'm not sure what the status of that is right now. But
hey, Matt, I could offer a couple comments.
oh, right,
this
you're
one.
involved with that. Yeah, that'd be great, Carla.
Yeah, sure. It was a unique situation all the way around, for sure. The identification of the hairy bush clover at this site was initially made back in 2018, and additional surveys conducted in 2019. This was a tough one for everybody involved in terms of moving through the takings permitting process because of the level of take. And so, pretty substantial mitigation plan was developed, and with multiple rounds of comments from the flag, and I think multiple rounds of comments from the ESC as well. They were pursuing a similarly protracted Act 250 land use permitting process. So all things said and done, it took nearly 3 years to get permits issued for the project. And so the LUP, the Act 250 permit, was issued midsummer this year. And so the takings permit had been conditioned on the Act 250 getting authorized as well. Both permits were conditioned on each other. So no mitigation action had happened until this summer, and then everyone went out on site to take another look around midsummer, late summer this year, in anticipation of starting to implement the mitigation measures, which included transplanting and a number of other actions. And come to find out that, not one, not two, not 10, but like thousands of seedlings of hairy bush clover volunteers had started to grow in an area that had not, where those plants had not previously occurred during all of the previous assessments and throughout the permitting phase. And the reason why they volunteered is that it's a quarry project, and the quarry had been given authorization to do a couple test pit locations where they basically just brought an excavator in, and I don't really know how other quarrying activities work, but this excavator basically just, scraped big rocks out of the side of the hill there. So there was freshly disturbed, mineral bedrock, and these volunteer hairy bush clover plants were growing like right up under the track of the excavator out of rock, from what everyone could observe. So Grace Glynn and I were on site doing a pre-mitigation implementation visit, and took a look around and saw what was happening. And so at that point, after those volunteers had been observed, the landowner, who's also the operator of the gravel pit, was suggested to cease that test pit operation, which was ceased at the time. And so that's sort of where things stand with the unauthorized take. Parallel to all of that happening, the mitigation transplanting work went ahead as planned and was completed.
Thanks for
Thanks, Carla.
adding those details, Carla. That's great. It's just to keep going, the last of the other takings was the airport. Details on that. But
Well, it wasn't, yeah, and this was off the airport property. It was
Okay.
just right adjacent to it. So, yeah,
so
just having a lot of fun in Highgate.
various problems in
That was another quarry.
Yeah.
Gosh, and I really don't want to chime in, but I also so I had identified these populations that had not previously been observed at this site, which is owned by a gravel pit and a private construction entity up that way. And I was conducting work on behalf of Velco for a planned line relocation, and they were going to use this old gravel pit as a staging area for construction. Hence my reason to do a plant survey on this site. And I don't really know the details, but this information had been conveyed to the landowner by Velco, as I understand it, and then an alleged take occurred. So
So I gather a notice of alleged violation has been issued, and that's.
And I could speak to the Colchester one too, but I don't, in the interest of time, I don't.
Yeah, we probably don't need to
Yeah.
go into it. It's just to keep this body informed that you to have. Won't spend a lot of time on the permits because we've already done that. We had 6 plant permits that were considered by Ag and brought to this group. Because Ag continues to have the brunt of the permits that come through this body. Mentioned we had our summer field trip to the White River Ledges. Sharon, I don't know, Carla, were you part of that field trip? No, just in a nutshell, they were looking at impacts from July flooding. We have a number of rare and listed species that occur in a variety of different riparian habitats, so particularly vulnerable to mid-season flood events. Many of them are adapted to early season flooding, but it's these mid-season flooding events side of the historic norm that have impact to cause harm, including one of our federally listed species, Chesapeake milkfetch. It was not a good year for that.
Other example though, Bob Pop has been cultivating multiple populations.
Right, yeah.
Which
we're
helped with
yeah.
resilience overall. Yeah.
Right. Not all of our eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
Two baskets. On the rediscoveries note, so our common called dooryard violet, you've probably all seen it, whether you knew it or not, relatively common species in thick woods, has undergone some taxonomic rejiggering, and there's been one of this species that has been split into by Rolandia scala. Was historically known from a single one or maybe 2 specimens in Vermont. Aaron Marcus, our deal for research one of those historical sites and did succeed in refinding it. At this point, it's considered a globally rare species. It was historically recognized and then sort of was lumped, and now it's sort of re-emerged. So maybe more common than we realized, but it takes it out of that historical category. Rediscoveries of note. They said we're moving forward with some S-rank updates with the subcommittee. We've got somewhere in 60 to 100 species we're looking through, update those ranks. In addition to a larger process, trying to get all of our species, including common species, make that more comprehensive information, which is maybe more helpful to adjoining states than to our own state, but part of the collective effort to understand distributions. And the last note is really just highlights that we continue to find new vascular plant species in the state as well. Many of them are unfortunately introduced species. Finding a whole lot of new natives, although many are native further south. So really, you never know 100% for certain, but it seems that there's a climate change effect here. Done a great job of continuing to collate those records and publish them periodically. So we're keeping everything up to date and packaged to keep our touristic knowledge. Okay. Leave it there. Questions?
Thank you, Matt. Fish.
Is that because you're excited?
I am totally excited.
We currently have 9 members, including Alan. I think this is the most we've ever had historically, which is great. Actually, a couple of members haven't been officially entered yet. We met once in 2023 with the usual reviewing Lampricide application permits. The only river that we looked at was the Fulton. Lewis Creek was also treated. There are no listed species of fish in Lewis Creek, so we didn't help with that. We had three major recommendations. The thing that we talked about right off the bat was the fact, and I brought this up before, is that Fish and Wildlife Department, per our request, began a channel darter and eastern sand darter survey of several of the rivers, which they did a really good job on, but they stopped in 2019. They included 3 years of data. Our recommendation was to resume that study in some form on a regular sampling basis. It didn't have to be annually, but on some regular basis to give us an idea of any impacts that were occurring to these sensitive darters. Like I said, up on the board there, the last record of channel darter in the Fulton River was 2008. We also suggested that the TFM concentration for the application be reduced by about 9%, 1.3 to 1.2 MLC. That's pretty much a regular, it's something we always recommend. Number three, we decided that the Hubbardton River doesn't always have a lot of lamprey in it, if any. So we suggested that they sample the river for sea lamprey using environmental DNA. If they didn't find any, they did not have to treat it. They should not treat it. They did that, and it was not treated. There was none found, which is really good. It saved them money, time, energy, and also it protected any of the potentially sensitive fish in the Hubbardton. Other activities of that year included the work of some of the FSAG members and myself attempting to update RT&E species distribution databases for both Fish and Wildlife Department and DEC. The biomonitoring group in DEC, Jim Deschler now is working on that database. That's the main DEC database. Fish and Wildlife has their own. And our first couple of meetings, we realized, yeah, they overlap a little, but there are some data that DEC has that Fish and Wildlife doesn't have, and vice versa. So right now, we're just trying to come up with spreadsheets that will later be evolved into databases which can talk to each other. So anybody within the agency can go to this and pull up all the latest data from all sources. It's myself, Will Eldridge, Jim Deschler, myself, and Mark Ferguson. Let me see. The last thing we did are doing about, like the rest of the SAGs, we are looking at prioritizing species for SGCN work. Myself, Will, Margaret Murphy, and Leal Will are on the fish taxa group. We're reviewing the 2015 Wildlife Action Plan and suggesting additional species for that, changes and updating. The last meeting, we added quite a few, and I just noted, I was just counting them up, and almost half the native fish species in the state are SGCN at this point. I don't know if that's going to be finalized to end up in the final. But we're basing it mostly on species, the lack of species. For instance, lack of presence, rarity. Past that, you look at where they are, where they're distributed, how apt are they to being affected by a single incident. so forth and so on. But at this point, we were just looking at distributions. I think that's pretty much it. Oh yeah, I mentioned we have 81 species. Eat your heart out in bird sag.
Question. So what happened that caused the list to increase so much on this GCN? Like, are there new data? Is there the need for data? Are there new threats? Is like how that's a drastic change, I assume
I
it
think
sounds
at
like.
this point, it's a suggested number. It was based, like I said, just based on rarity. Say 10, 15 locations in the state. The
Mhm.
state's been pretty much fairly well covered with traditional sampling, like traditional sampling needs. You know, electroshocking, boat electroshocking, netting, so forth and so on. So we have access to all that. We've got over 9,000 records that we use for Fishes of Vermont. So we have a pretty good idea. If you have a species with only, 10 records, maybe it should be SDC. Several of the species are already there.
Mhm.
Several of the species are special concern for the fish side. And most of the species on those lists also have S rankings of S1 to S3.
So it sounds like it was a change in what was making it to the list, not that you've seen some
Oh, no, yeah, it was mostly
huge
Margaret.
change.
Mostly Margaret.
Mhm.
She came in and thought, well, this is, I guess maybe her first look at it.
Yeah.
And that's, she's the chair of that group, so we'll be discussing it.
Follow up on her question. So you're not seeing additional new threats. You're seeing essentially simulation of old threats, but have new data.
That's correct, yeah, we don't have any information on new threats.
Mhm.
What are the ongoing threats that you really think for fish that need to be addressed?
Yeah, unfortunately, all of our listed species are in the low elevation areas in the western part of the state, in large rivers, which have huge drainage basins. So where do you start? Where do you attempt to start at trying to improve habitat and the Winooski River in Winooski? I mean, it's pretty mind-boggling. It would be much easier if we had one or two second order streams to deal with. You could address that. But it's difficult to look at any one particular aspect and pinpoint that. I think in general, it's sedimentation, perhaps hydroregulation, and probably water chemistry, pollutants, less so now than in the past. Wastewater treatment plants, chlorination. I mean, the list goes on. It's gotten better in the last 30 or 40 years. But nothing, when we start to look at producing a restoration plan, it's to some of these species like the darters and stonecat, where do you start? They're all in the lower elevation rivers about Lake Road. Very, very difficult to do a broad spectrum of fix on those things.
Other questions for Rich? Okay. Don? Yeah.
Did you need me to speak?
Uh,
I thought we were already
oh,
accepted. So I saw it on the. Was it on there?
I don't see it here.
oh, we might have done, might have been passed. We might have done that. Okay. Yeah, yeah.
I'm not sure about Will. Will was our last. Okay, that's good. I don't take enough time. I'm looking at the wrong agenda.
I was just gonna say, I mean, it should be documented in our minutes, which are easily accessible. I can go back and take a look just to double check, and if that's not the case, we can bring it up in the April meeting, so. Okay, John, looking at permit updates, and then if you and Roz want to tag team on wildlife action plan stuff.
It just came in very recently. I haven't even had a chance to send them out to you yet. Two permit applications. One just came in yesterday. The Fish and Wildlife Service wants to put lampricide in the Winooski River. Should be getting that from Jen Mojo hopefully shortly. They say that it's the same essential proposal that they did in 2015 when they last treated it. I was directed long ago to not touch anything related to lampricide. So that's what I'm deferring to Jen on that from our central office to handle that.
How did you do that?
I sat down at the meeting, was told that, and then was told to leave.
Wow,
So,
Kind of curious, do you remember off the top of your head the time frame of this? I mean, I think that would be something that ESC would definitely like to revisit is, are we doing this for multiple cycles? Because I feel like, I don't know, just thinking about new expertise in the state and also just thinking about, I don't know, just a whole slew of things and just whether if we can, we can have this conversation more often. Anyway, we'll see it. So, I mean, it feels like that, I feel like that's something that I think we'd like to push back on because there were a lot of comments on that and I don't know, maybe addressing that sooner rather than later as opposed to sort of the last minute. So. Yep.
and then the other is this one. I'm really not sure what to say to you guys about this one. Encore Redevelopment wants to put a solar facility in Danville in a grassland. And supposedly in 2021, grasshopper sparrow was spotted there. The plan originally was to have them they were going to put it in winter when there would be no grasshopper sparrow. So there would be a need for an endangered species permit. They still had to go through the Section 248 process. Section 248 is what governs energy development. So they were working with Noel and Roz. Were you plugged in on that?
Eventually, in the last breath.
Yeah, I just found out about this last week when they submitted the application. I think some delay is happening and they're not gonna finish the installation until midsummer. So as part of the Section 248 process, they have an agreement where they would mow weekly to try and keep grasshopper sparrows from showing up until they're done. But they still had to submit as part of that
Avoiding
to
take.
get their
Yeah.
get their certificate of public good. They still have to get an endangered species permit. So I've got this application that says, hey, here's what we're doing, and we already have this agreement with ANR saying it's as long as we mow, it's okay. And they're gonna give $55,000 over the next 20 years to the Bobolink Project, which is a grassland bird restoration fund. Again, but somehow it's administered by Mass Audubon.
Yeah.
So that's the story. I was gonna send it to you and say, what do you guys want to provide any advice on this? But I'm not sure what that,
Mhm.
you guys are, the Endangered Species Committee is supposed to provide advice to the secretary on these
Mhm.
permits, and the secretary is not supposed to issue a permit until they get your advice, but I'm not sure what sort of space you have to give advice here. Roz, am I missing anything?
No, that's pretty much it.
So,
I tried to get out there to confirm whether there was really a grasshopper sparrow there or not, but wasn't able to get permission.
But you said 2021 was when
Yeah,
it was
and then it
documented?
was
Oh,
the following year, and
Uh-huh.
grasshopper sparrow was not reported.
mhm. Savannah there, you know?
I don't remember, but
Uh-huh.
probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, that was that's
Yeah.
a good way to check that, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm thinking they could also weekly mow the lawns of everyone on the ESC, all the SAG chairs. Yeah, send it to us. Yeah, I love it.
The application.
Okay,
that,
yeah.
Some of the.
I mean, I guess,
they use for the survey,
yeah.
but, waiting for that to come in and then I'll send it to you.
I guess I'm saying send it to us, send it, I mean, you can copy us, but it really should go to BirdSag, so, yeah.
Has there ever been a situation where maybe maybe they weren't gonna start it all until July, right? And that they are told to mow all through the season, like even if they weren't gonna start until the very end of the grasshopper sparrow nesting season. Would there be such a permit where it says, okay, you can do that, but to avoid take, you're gonna have to mow all season long to keep them out of there? Because this is sort of a halfway
Yeah,
scenario of that.
yeah, I don't recall that situation happening. Maybe something somewhat similar with plants where they had to maybe move some plants
Mhm.
but no, this is one of those ones that we just haven't stumbled into before.
So question, would the construction of the solar panels preclude grasshopper sparrows from nesting there again?
Yeah, I think
And
it takes up,
And that's been permitted.
So it's not been, I mean.
I mean,
That's what you mean, how you
it's-
define permitted.
it's-
So our endangered species law says you can't kill or harm or give a migraine to the bird or the
Right.
plant.
Is the
But you
habitat-
could wipe out its habitat unless it's designated
Yeah.
critical habitat.
and then there's still the 2-to-1 mitigation for grassland bird habitat.
Which, right. So,
Just
so
separate
basically,
Which isn't under.
this permit is
Right.
just to continue for them to be able to work in the summer.
Correct.
It's not long-term protection of the
No.
site for this species.
No, that site will,
Correct.
when they're done, there'll be no habitat.
There'll be no habitat.
So in some cases, there have been provisions where they say afterwards you have to remove everything and let it go revert back to whatever habitat it was before, but who knows?
Does this
Okay.
group had a presentation by Noel or you, Roz, about our fast becoming long-standing practice of dealing with solar energy development in grassland birds?
Have you guys? Has
I don't know if
BirdSag?
we've had a present, I mean,
No,
mean,
that was
we've-
actually-
We've read it, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah,
It would be really
yeah,
Yeah,
Mhm.
okay.
yeah,
aware
yeah.
of how we're dealing with it, the
Mhm.
frequency, I mean, this
yeah,
could be a full-time job for one of our folks
yeah,
these days.
Yeah.
There is so
Yeah.
much
It's a lot of
solar
solar.
energy development, and it's inevitably falling where grassland birds like to be,
Yeah.
so.
I mean, we've had a lot of conversations about would it be,
With excellent too.
Yeah.
Yes.
but would it be possible to, I mean, with the rate that dairy farms are going out of business, buy up several dairy farms and have a mitigation bank so that we're creating a giant grassland bird habitat somewhere in the Champlain Valley where they are.
Well, Roz is thinking about that, and I think at some point to have a conversation with whomever you think is most appropriate to assess what we are doing and what we ought to be doing.
I've been talking for 2 years since I started this job about, we
Oh, yeah.
used to have our little grass.
Yeah, right.
Group.
Yeah.
And get those folks together, maybe some
Mhm.
others, Toby.
Yeah.
And, kind of, and Jillian now, and, like develop a broader strategy, longer term, like how are we going to do this?
Yeah.
Because it's piecemeal getting
Yeah,
ripped away, and
yeah,
who can contribute what piece, or how can we divert the funds in a way that's more permanent?
yeah,
But
actually suits the needs of the species, whoever you're
Yeah.
protecting, because like the 2-to-1 is like, that's just a pocket.
exactly.
It's not a landscape scale solution.
And also
How much is going to the bobbling project?
all of it.
5,000. 5,000.
But over 25 years, which means.
Depending on how they do it, many of the developers pay that in a lump sum right at the beginning. so
They
don't-
prefer to.
Yeah, so, okay.
We have this going on with a lot
Yeah.
of solar developers now, and, one of the myriad of challenges for us in dealing with all of this is just the capacity to monitor this growing array of permitted facilities that all
Mhm.
have these requirements, many of which involve funding going from one place to another, and we're responsible for making sure that that happens.
Yeah.
And the list only goes up.
Yep.
It's kind of nuts, actually.
Mhm.
As someone who's worked with some of the solar developers in the state over the years and some of the bigger solar projects that have gone in and wrestled with the grassland bird issue, I've been asked by developers, if there is some kind of mitigation bank to buy into as a mitigation for impacts, by a few different private entities. So I think I'm encouraged to hear that, brought up. I think it was Mark who made that comment. And I think, for at least for the folks I can echo, that there's some willingness on the part of the solar development community to go with something like that. From their perspective, it's having sort of a clear path forward and having sort of a consistent process. And I like that idea of the mitigation bank.
Yeah, because, 2-1 for grasshopper sparrows in Danville, it's kind of like, yeah.
Right.
Yep.
I'd love to see solar just going on rooftops and in parking lots more. That's the ultimate solution.
Did you guys see, have you seen the report by Mass Audubon Hardwood Forest? It's released a couple months ago. It's really great analysis. And they're a little bit ahead of us as far as like solar development on natural and working lands, causing a lot of these problems. And so they did this, Jonathan Thompson, Harvard Forest, did a spatial analysis with folks from Mass Audubon to look at like what's the capacity for rooftop, over parking lots, and they figured they do have the capacity. But the way the state, sort of incentives are, they need to sort of adjust policy to incentivize, because it costs a little bit more for that kind of solar, but it's also costing a lot ecologically and from a carbon standpoint. When they put solar in these, we lose agricultural production, we lose grassland birds, we also are losing forests, right? So it's actually a really great analysis and probably would be very applicable to Vermont, I would think. I just Google, if you just Google like Mass Audubon solar, thumbs up.
Yeah, that'd be good to read, because
Yeah.
I've heard people
pass it.
dispute that for Vermont, so that'd be interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Solar people, actually.
Yeah, it comes,
Well,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
so much more expensive.
Yeah.
And
I had, when I was at the state, I did a number, because there is this push there's been a lot of pushing the solar into forests, right? With like the buffer of trees, it's like, 100 feet wide, and then there's a 10, 15 acre clear cut of the forest, and also like dredging, to put conduit in, it disrupts the soil. And so they've done these carbon analyses, and like, if you just look at it from a purely carbon standpoint, you can argue that doing that is beneficial from a greenhouse gas perspective, but it obviously doesn't account for biodiversity, water resources, like all the other, services that our natural and working lands provide. So it gets really squishy when you look at that, like just from a numbers perspective. So solar developers do say that, but I don't think an analysis has happened in
Yeah,
our state
right.
to look at like what capacity do we have, old, landfills, old like places, old quarries, like are there other places where we could have a smaller impact on
Yeah.
wildlife and
Yeah.
ecology? So
Yeah, but you throw the quarry thing out there. I remember an endangered species meeting with Bill Kilpatrick, and he was saying, oh yeah, we found a whole bunch of bats that were using.
okay.
Eastern small-footed bat, yes,
Yeah.
So, yeah,
hairy bush clover.
yeah, right.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 Doesn't matter what form it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your point
Just
about,
this-
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna speak up for the bees too about quarries and sand pits, like where
Mm.
they're putting solar. There's a lot of bee
Oh.
species that are actually nesting in those areas, it turns out, that are
Mm.
really rare. So, yeah.
Points about mitigation banking, before I forget, are really important.
Yeah.
We've been thinking about that also in the department, and I might suggest that consider inviting Noel Dodge in to give a brief presentation to the committee so you can have a better understanding, more detailed understanding of how we've been doing business for the last 10 years
Mhm.
and what the landscape of solar energy development and wildlife conflicts looks like. And then maybe that puts you in a position of offering some perspective to the secretary and commissioner on.
Yeah. Mhm.
We had actually considered and went so far as to draft proposed legislation that would give us the authority to create a mitigation bank. Right now, we don't have explicit authority to do it.
Hmm.
We've threaded the needle a few times over the years. Some Act 250 and Public Utility Commission projects, but we need more explicit authority in order to create the system that's going to effectively serve those needs. But I do think it would serve Vermont's interests better if we had some sort of a funding system that remained in the state and actually was doing something for permanent, long-term conservation.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, most of the money to Mass Audubon does stay in the state. I mean, most of
Oh,
that,
absolutely.
yeah, but still, it's not permanent.
We're very grateful for Mass Audubon managing that.
Yep.
For us.
Yeah.
Don't have Mass.
Hmm. Yeah.
Regarding land banking, mitigation, habitat, I had a woman get in touch with me just within the last month, and she was saying, you know, what would be really useful for us, he was on the Conservation Commission, is maps of where in our town the most valuable pieces of privately owned habitat are that could be used as kind of mitigation, could be protected when development was happening in a different section of town. And that sounded like a huge project to me, which I think would be valuable, but a huge project. And then I kind of went off that to thinking, well, maybe if we just looked at our endangered species and then identified the 4 or 5 pieces of privately owned habitat that would be most useful to that species if they could be protected. You know, if there's development that's taking place in another area that's affecting rattlesnakes, then maybe this is the piece of land that you ought to be looking at and thinking about. And it's kind of an offshoot of the critical habitat idea. It's just these things aren't, we've only listed a very limited amount of parcels as critical habitat. We've been very cautious. But just to identify, okay, these would be the top 4 for grasshopper sparrow, or these would be the top 4 for racer, et cetera. I mean, it seems like it might be useful. I was thinking about that because this woman was asking me for that, but we haven't done it. And we haven't really thought about where is the privately owned best habitat for these species.
For what it's worth, I mean, that's something that Antilpa does for the town all the time.
Yeah.
In helping them figure out how to identify key habitat in their places, how to prioritize that, and, you know, hopefully also, you know, at a broader scale, rather than just parcel by parcel, look at rezoning and or where they want to invest conservation dollars. That he's all set up for that.
So the idea would be then to give him the input. Could be SAG input going to him.
Could be SAG, but also the town could go to him and he can walk them through using BioFinder, which is ECB overlay.
Yeah.
Part of your answer right there.
Yeah.
Endangered species, you know, there's endangered species data built into that. So, you know,
Yeah,
It's not the species by species kind of, here's the best
yeah.
piece that I think you're kind of getting at.
but it gets the town first thinking at a bigger scale of what's, you know, where are the key places in their town and everything from connectivity to hotspots.
This strikes me as a little bit different than that in that it's more focused, like you're saying, it's more focused on particular species. and it's more focused on appropriate habitat for a given species.
Well, one
Well,
thing.
there's a huge,
Species, so benefit that the same species.
Yeah,
somewhere
yeah.
else.
so we're talking with VCE, they have a massive database now.
Yeah.
Biodiversity writ large, you know, with like 3,000 species. And we're actually starting conversations now with Kent and Mike Holworth about looking at all those data in light of Vermont conservation design and see where Vermont conservation design could be missing some things, or where they line up really well in terms of prioritization. But just so you can look at what Jens is using, which is based on VCD. But then if you're wanting to drill down to species, eventually, I hope there'll be a sort of also a tandem data set that shows actual species that you can pick from, you know, and you can see the two overlaid, right? And so you can look at the bigger picture of how does my town fit into the bigger picture with VCD, where the priority blocks are and the connectivity and all that. But then also, oh, I'm interested in this suite of species, and this is where they are, or this is where we think they are.
Yeah, we did have, I think probably most of the SAGs had a conversation with talking about VCD. And does the coarse filter approach catch this species?
Right.
Or does it not?
Right.
And I think for many of the herbs, that really a fine filter
Mhm.
was more appropriate.
Yep.
And that's kind of what I'm thinking of. But I hear what you're saying, that you're working in that direction.
Well, the answer already is, in that the endangered species data layers are
Already there.
part of the package that he brings to town.
Right.
Helps them interpret and understand. You know, VC may have some additional information, but generally, I think any endangered species data, you know, locations that they pick up are being imported into the state's database anyway. So it's the same thing. Kent is probably going to come up with some different ways of slicing and dicing that to help us better understand things. But that Jens is a great first step for that person to talk to.
Yeah, I'm not arguing against that. I mean, it's, well, your data is generally about 2 years behind. And
That's pretty good for us.
that's, yeah, okay.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
No, I was just thinking, like, municipalities have the authority to plan for, you know, all the land uses, including preserving natural resources. And so, you know, using Jens as an example of informing a town. And then even, you know, if you're an expert in something in your community, you can bring your information to that can modify whatever data the state has if it's 2 years old. And, you know, in addition to that natural resource planning that the municipality does, there's at the regional level, you have your regional planning commissions. And then additionally, I was just thinking about the comment about Mass Audubon and, you know, and analyzing the potential for rooftop solar or solar in parking lots to avoid green development and green fields of solar. Act 174 back in 2017, maybe, regional planning commissions are responsible for providing information regarding the capacity of towns to have rooftop. So I'm just reading a report because I when I was involved in land use planning at the Agency of Agriculture, I had participated in this report writing, and so it includes this. I've not been involved recently in this, so I don't know how it's changed or morphed since a long time ago, maybe 2018. But there are resources, and I'm wondering whether or not, like, you know, bringing somebody in from a regional planning commission to talk about solar specifically to this committee to kind of begin to bring the pieces together might be helpful.
In one other layer, depending on when we'll see how this Eastern Meadowlark recovery plan comes out, might give us some insight as well. Since that is
Yeah.
a listed species,
Mhm.
you know, and maybe just a little more compatible with bobbling.
Just fall under the table,
other-
John. Come on. Yeah,
Where's my sense?
yeah.
I know you want to keep them.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, we did one last, the final agenda item, and we can have a quick talk about wildlife action plans, is was the moving it because the Northeastern wildlife meetings are the week that we've got the April SAG scheduled for. So I was pushing for an April 17th meeting, moving that from was it the 23rd was thanks, John.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
For the day.
Yep. I'm this semester, I'm actually teaching on Tuesday and Thursday, so it would be great for me to put it on to a Wednesday if that works with people's schedule. 17th. Okay. All right. Okay, that is great. So we'll do 9 to 2 on the 17th. Yeah, so why don't we wrap it up with what you guys would like to pass along in terms of the wildlife action plan, and yeah.
Thanks for that. So, yeah, we have to update our action plans every 10 years in order to continue getting federal state wildlife grant funds for that. Our goal is to get the revised action plan submitted by September of 2025. So a year and 3/4 from now. Generally, that means identifying key species of greatest conservation need, their habitats, threats to those species and their habitats, actions recommended for each of those species and their habitats, what sort of monitoring we might recommend doing, engaging the public, engaging partners, factoring in existing conservation plans, other planners, and like I said, doing a bunch of public engagement with that. We did the first one in 2005, revised it in 2015. So this next one's due 2025. We've traditionally done it using taxa teams, a bird team, a herb team, a fish team, an invertebrate team, a plant team, and the like, to first identify those species of greatest conservation need. A number of you have probably already been contacted by our staff who were assigned to lead each of those teams that help with that. The hope is that by late spring of this year, say by May 1st, that each of the teams has identified a draft list of species of greatest conservation need. Generally, I mean, I think that would be first deciding, has anything substantively changed with the existing list? Does anything need to be added or removed from that list? Knowing that starting in May, field season starts and everyone wants to has outdoor stuff to do. Take the summer, have the teams take the summer off, use that time to get public input and input from other partner groups on the draft lists. Come back in the fall, and from fall of 2024 till say, late winter 2024, draft, put together the write-ups for those species and the habitat that are the base of the action plan. Again, go back out for public and partner comment through the summer, and then have the plan submitted to the feds in September of 2025. That's the big scale of it. This time around, we will try and enhance it with more weaving more deeply into it, Vermont conservation design, climate change to the extent that we can for species and habitats, and whatever other issues that the teams think are important for species and habitats. That cover most of it, Roz?
Sounded good.
Yeah, what I was going to ask, I mean, is there anything that, that you would really love to see the SAGs maybe dig into a little bit deeper that like didn't happen in 2015, or you think would be a real, push forward on this version?
I think one would be, I think Bob Zano has already talked to mention to some of the SAG, that the extent to which Vermont conservation design, if it were fully implemented, would address many of the needs of species of greatest conservation need. the Vermont conservation design perfectly implemented tomorrow isn't gonna protect everything from diseases or a number of other things, but to what extent will it address at least the habitat?
Yeah.
And how, you know, and that's really hard to do even with like some sort of level of like, well, we're certain, we're 50% confident, we're 25% confident, we just don't know. But to the extent we could do that for a number of species, great.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe flagging others with a, I don't know, or more research.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Trying to also get into, you know, I think wildlife disease issues, plant disease issues have really, you know, and our awareness of the potential impact have certainly gone up a lot in the last 10 years. So to the extent that there's elements of that we need to augment our action plan with, that would be great. You know, I'll say there's a big part of me that's saying, you know, we're talking about a statewide plan, and also part of my role and Rod's role to some extent is trying to integrate our plan with all the neighboring states as well as a nationwide plan. Rolling this out, you know, talking about individual species on a scale of millions of acres can be, you know, crazy. It's like, you know, where, you know, how do we group some of these things so we're not doing species by species management?
Yeah.
At a big scale. So, but again, part of the Endangered Species Committee's role is to think about all those species that fall through the cracks or the coarse filters, and they're rare for some damn reason that makes them so damn special. And how do we not forget them as we're doing big scale planning? So
Yeah.
how do we keep both those things in mind?
Well, and this is where this. Okay, this is where, you know, there's the process that Act 59 is starting. I hope we'll do using VCD, but then using also expert opinion and VCE's data. Like, again, it brings all those things together that are kind of happening at the same time. So the more we can think about how this plan could dovetail with those other efforts. It's a little hard because everything's kind of getting started at the same time. So we have nothing concrete to point to as far as where these other efforts are going, except VCD, which is rolling out its update now. We'll hear about in April. But nothing that hasn't inherently changed, just so you know. VCD is essentially the same, and it's been fine-tuned is more what's happening with that. But it'll be more useful because of it. So, you know, the more we can think about integrating, you know, VCD with what SGCN need that aren't included, and how that can go into the plan in some way without creating a ton of extra work for everybody. So I feel like I'm repeating myself, but it's kind of what John was speaking to, of like, the more that you can inform the plan with regards to, you know, here are the things that could get lost, or that are different or weird or whatever that we have to keep an eye on, and here they are. That can happen at the taxa group level. And the data analysis that VCE is going to do, like, that might flesh out even more that maybe we hadn't even thought of, or to what degree it's happening. So
Yeah.
how it all magically come together and all be cohesive and interdependent and
Some harp music.
yeah. Harmonize as one.
So with that said, any questions, any ideas, any recommendations, whether it's through the teams or just because something came across, you know, came to you while in the shower, let me know. Happy to try and get it to the right people or the right committees. Try and figure out a way to address this, or to weave it into the plan. And then, you know, the other piece is, as Ross mentioned earlier, we're hoping for actually substantive funding, you know, changes through Congress that will allow us to actually
To the
fully
plan.
implement or more
Mhm.
fully implement the bill
Yeah,
or the plan. Right now, we're getting, less than 10% of the money we need to implement the action plan.
hmm
And
That
the,
may take a miracle.
the other thing we've talked about, maybe I missed this, so just tell me if I missed this, because I was setting up the next meeting at the same time, but is making the plan a little more digestible. So whether that's, having simplified, more accessible products and maybe a few different ones depending on audiences, because instead of having this big fat, did you already mention this?
I didn't, but
This
that's-
big fat plan that, nobody looks at except when they want to write a grant and they, want to be like, can I say it's an SGCN? Yes, I can. I'll put that in the grant.
yeah, I mean, the fact that you kind of break it into pieces online is helpful, I
Yeah.
think, but yeah, one thing for, I don't know if this works for other taxa or not, but certainly for birds, I mean, it's, the birds are ordered in taxonomic order, and maybe it actually makes sense to put them into habitat groups or something like that, so. Which might work for other.
Well,
taxa
and
as
we've had
well.
those discussions too, around, how can we have these discussions in a broader way too. How can we be doing things as groups
Yeah,
rather than
right,
species by
exactly,
species,
yeah.
because we can't keep up if we do it species by species. So we've talked in the steering committee around the plan about, that idea. And I think we charged Bob Zano with some thinking on that, right? Like he's supposed to kind of figure all that out, right?
While doing all the activity and stuff.
Yeah.
Yes, could you, hopefully, well, we need to update the database that sort of underlies a bunch of this thing, and hopefully you might be able to say, tell me everything about waterfowl in the action plan, in a digestible fashion, or whatever.
Yeah.
Left-handed bryophytes, or I don't know what. However that works. Hoping we can get there.
Yeah,
I was just wondering where Vermont stands in this in terms of funding.
In an awkward spot. So Recovering America's Wildlife Act, the federal funding that states have been asking for 40 years now, essentially, to fully implement this sort of thing. The Senate has a bill that would be very much what maybe we shared previously, would go a long way in funding things. The House chair of the Natural Resources Committee, Roz mentioned this earlier, has proposed a much more scaled down version of, RAWA light, maybe, that a lot more limitations, and it wouldn't be permanent. It hasn't even been introduced yet, so who knows how it might change once it's introduced. But maybe, there may be an interim, if we come to some agreement that maybe it's something interim, but we still need to work on permanent funding. Without permanent funding, we'll never be able to get authorization to hire staff to actually spend the money or even shovel money out the door. So it's this awkward thing right now, but more to come.
Don't hold my breath.
No, not. Anyone else?
thanks, everyone. Sorry for my pitiful time management skills.
Hey, you did pretty good.
Yeah, that's.
Well, no, I think I think I had us adjourning early today, so, yeah.
We all
know that. Yeah.
Yeah. Before the snow, you're getting us out of here
All right.
before the snow,
Yeah.
although